love that we're in this Uncharted series where we're going through navigating our faith in uncertain situations. And when we need to leave our comfort zones, maybe God is instilling something and principles, maybe character developments that he's working within us. And, Joseph's life really exhibits this, but maybe you've found yourself in a situation where you don't really know what to do next, or maybe you're not really sure where to go, or maybe you have a map of your life and you feel like there's a hole in it. And that's actually what I titled my sermon today is There's a Hole in My Map, because we know where we're starting and we know where we want to go, but it seems like the middle is a little void, and there's something where we are not really sure what each step has in store for us. And life often can feel like navigating with a map that has some holes in it, but let me encourage you that Joseph gives us a glimpse of what it means to trust God throughout the whole process. Can you say amen to that? And Proverbs says it this way: trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding, but in all of your ways submit to him, and he will make your path straight. Now, I used to read this and think, oh, that means like God will make it easy. It's like I'm walking down easy street where the sun's always shining, not a cloud in the sky. Why does that look like rain? So it seems like life can sometimes throw us clouds and thunderstorms where we weren't expecting them. And this verse isn't saying that God's going to make the path easy and wide, but he will say, I will light your path. I will walk with you every single step. Through every twist and turn and detour, I will be with you to guide you. And so when we submit to the Lord and lean not on our own understanding, we're allowing God to guide us through life's uncertainty. Can you say amen to that? And maybe you're like me and you love going outdoors, you love adventure, you love going maybe skiing where you shouldn't go skiing, maybe you love going hiking where you shouldn't go hiking, or maybe you have a great idea to take a car that should not go to the beach. And my wife and I, we love adventure, and so we find ourselves in these predicaments often where we have a vehicle that is four-wheel drive but is not suited for the great sand dunes of Oregon. But I had a great idea that maybe we can make it. And so we get our car, we get the ATV tag so we can go off-road. Yeah, it's official. And so we start out and we have a starting point. We have a destination, the beach, and we don't really know the middle. And when we get to the start of the dunes, I have this check in my spirit, this feeling like, don't do this. And I was like, that's just fear and doubt. Leave me now. We're going to make it. And so we get onto the sand, and instantly I'm like, this is a very bad idea. And I'm like, no, maybe we can make it. So we just go, and I'm ignoring all the warnings. And as soon as I start getting a little too far to turn around, I realized I cannot stop, because if I stop, I sink. And so my foot is on the gas the whole way. And we get all the way up until this point. We're about a mile into the dunes, a mile in. And there's this great seawall of about 50 feet of sand. And I'm thinking, I don't think I'm going to make that. So I have to stop, because even if I make it over that, I'm not coming back. And so I stop, and I'm like, I'm going to turn around. I'm going to try to just get out of here. And so I put it in reverse. Big mistake. I went back into the softest part of the sand and instantly sunk until the vehicle was on its belly, just spinning tires. And it was like laying flat on the sand, and I'm like, uh-oh, I'm stuck. But good news, I had a friend with me. He's never done this before either, so we were in good company. But he had a better vehicle suited for the sand, and I was like, even if we get stuck, he can pull me out, even though he doesn't know what he's doing. We have Google, so we can look up Google. Well, we were trying to get unstuck, and then people are driving by in their sand dunes laughing, just pointing and laughing, not helping, just laughing. And I'm thinking, this is not cool. We're obviously in a dire situation, and no one wants to help us. And then I realized we have our wives and children with us, and women and children always get help. And so we decided we're going to leave the women and the children to get help. And so we went to go get traction mats. This is a true story. Judge me later. But we go to get traction mats, and as soon as we leave, left and right, they're getting offers for help. I needed help too, but because I'm a guy, no one wanted to help. They just wanted to laugh. And so they're getting help. They're digging out the car. We get back with the traction mats, and then we get pulled out, and we're able to get back to safety. And it's a great story in the end. But it feels like sometimes life can throw us curveballs where we're not really sure what to do next, and we're just trying to do the next right thing in the way to get unstuck or get to the point where God is calling us. And let me encourage you, you cannot get unstuck alone. You need someone to help you. And God is there to help us get unstuck in these moments where we feel like life seems hopeless. The missing piece of our life's map is really God. It's God's direction and his guidance and his ability to show us the way that we need to go, deepen our faith, develop our character, and allow us to understand that there are parts of our journey that God is bringing us to so that he can bring us into something better in the future. Can you say amen to that? And so we're looking at the life of Joseph because Joseph was no stranger to detours. Joseph, I love his story because he was one that he knew that God gave him a dream, and all throughout his life, it just seemed like the dream was killed. It seemed like there was the death of this dream because nothing seemed to make sense in his journey until the very end. His story is one of promise, one of fulfillment, one of God's sovereignty and his providence, but it's really one of faith. One where we can trust God every step of the way. Now, his life is actually told in the book of Genesis, and more time in Genesis is devoted to Joseph's story than any other person in Genesis. That means that God really wants us to learn from the life of Joseph. And it's interesting too, when Joseph's story begins, that's when the audible voice of God stops. It's very interesting because when Joseph's story begins, he doesn't speak to Joseph audibly like he was to his patriarchs, but he was speaking to him in dreams and in situations. And it reminds me of this. I'd rather have God in my life being silent yet present than loud and distant. You see, I'd rather have God in my life silent yet present than loud and distant because God was with Joseph every single step of the way. And so more time was spent on his life than any other character. And his life is one of faith where we can see that God is with him the entire time, even though it doesn't seem to always make sense. And I want to ask us a question. It's this: how do we trust God when the map of our life seems like it has holes in it? How do we trust God when we seem like we're missing something or something is incomplete? And Joseph, he actually leaves us clues as to this story. Now, this is the account of Jacob's family line. Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending the flocks with his brothers, the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, and his father's wives, and he brought their father a bad report about them. Now, when you read this, you immediately think, Joseph is a tattletale. Joseph is a punky teenager. He's 17 years old, and he's going to bring a bad report about his brothers in the field. Well, actually, it shows Joseph was a man of integrity, and he knew that whatever God revealed to him, he needed to share it despite what trouble it may cause him. Bringing a bad report about his brothers wasn't about tattletaling on them. It was about being faithful in what he was receiving. Being faithful in the little things allowed God to trust him with greater things. And so when you and I face things that in our life that, do I really need to be faithful with this? Yes. Faithful in little allows us to be faithful in much. And now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons because he had been born to him in his old age. How many of us have a favorite child? Don't raise your hand. Joseph was the favorite son. And he made an ornate robe for him. It was this coat that was maybe bedazzled with something on it. And it was something to distinguish him as set apart from the other sons. And when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. Now, I have family issues, but I don't have family issues like this family. And we're going to find out that God can do anything no matter what your background is. No matter what kind of family you come from, God can redeem all of it. And Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. Now you're thinking, Joseph, get your foot out of your mouth, man. You already know that you tattletaled on them. You're daddy's favorite. And now you're going to tell them this dream where they're all going to bow down to you one day. He's asking to be hurt. I mean, I don't know. Maybe he's thinking they're gonna celebrate with me, because he says this dream that he's gonna have is one day his sheaf stood up, and all their sheaves, while they were gathering grain, came and bowed down to his sheaf. And then that meant that one day they're gonna bow down to him. And his brothers hated him all the more. And they said, do you really intend to rule over us? Do you really intend to reign over us? And then they could not speak anything kind to him. They absolutely hated him. And we're gonna read this next part together. It's in your notes and on the board. Ready, get set, go. Then he had another dream, and he told it to his brothers. Listen, he said, I had another dream, and this time the sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me. You know, it's interesting, but Joseph understood that it was a God-given dream, and so he wanted to share what God was revealing to him. And you and I, when we get God-given dreams in our lives, when we have this hope of a preferred future, and sometimes we share it with others, we don't always get the response we hoped for. Because when he told his father, as well as all his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, what is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you? His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. That meant that Jacob was a little more open to what this dream had in store. Maybe God was telling Joseph something about the future. Now, if you're taking notes, this is our first point. God is in the dream. God is in the dream. You know, this is the promise. You and I have a promise of a preferred future. And God might reveal a dream that he has instilled in your heart. And Joseph, he had two dreams, but they were one and the same. They really confirmed this idea that God was going to establish Joseph as a ruler one day. But God plants dreams and promises, but he doesn't always give us the process along the way. He might reveal it as we step in step with him, but often we need tenacity and grit for the dream that God gives us. Did you know that Walt Disney was fired for lacking imagination? Michael Jordan was cut from his high school basketball team. Beethoven was told he had no future in music. And Sylvester Stallone was rejected hundreds of times for the movie Rocky before someone finally accepted it. And you know, Sylvester, he says this, I take rejection as someone blowing a bugle in my ear to wake me up and get going rather than retreat. You see, God's promises will never fail. God's promises will come to pass. His promises will never fail, but we can fail his promises. Meaning we can give up. We can give in. We can say, you know what? It's too difficult. It's too hard. There's too much against me, and I'm not going to make it. And that's when we fail the promise. But God's promise will always come to pass if we cooperate with him. Can you say amen to that? They have no expiration date. His promises are lasting. It's not if the dream will come true, but when and how will the dream come true. And do we remain faithful, or do we complain when we face detours, when we face distractions, when we face things that seem like hindrances? Do we remain faithful, or do we give up entirely? Because Joseph's brothers, they hated Joseph. Now Joseph one day was going out to the fields, and his brothers saw Joseph walking up, and they said, let's kill this dreamer and see what happens to his dreams now. But his older brother Reuben said, you know, we can't kill him. He's our own flesh and blood. Let's not kill him, because he wanted to save him and bring him back to the father. And so they didn't listen to Reuben. They put him in a pit. And then there were some Ishmaelite, Midianite traders walking through, and they sold Joseph off into slavery. Now Joseph is sold into slavery and carted off to Egypt. And that's the end of the story in the book of Genesis. That's really how it ends, and it goes into a new story. And you're left on this cliffhanger. What just happened to Joseph? We just got this whole dream revealed. Well, you have to go to the next chapter. And then finally, Joseph's story comes back again. See, he's sold to a man named Potiphar. He was one of the chief officials in Egypt at the time. And he's a slave in Potiphar's court. And he's working for Potiphar. But it says this, when he got there, that the Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered, and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. And when his master saw that the Lord was with him and that the Lord gave him success in everything that he did not have a concern or care for any of the matters in his household. He put it all under Joseph's care. What that means is Joseph was not only a man of great integrity, but whatever he did, God caused it to succeed. And so his master saw this and put him as the highest ranking official in his house over all the other slaves, over all the other servants. And so Joseph rose to a position of power within Potiphar's household. And Joseph's journey from promise to Potiphar's house was anything but a straight road. He went from the promise to a pit to being sold to Potiphar. And now he's working for Potiphar, but God was building something within him. He was teaching him how to lead, how to manage, and how to act with integrity. And so if you're taking notes, this is our second point. God is in the detours. God is in the detours. You know, when we're looking at life's twists and turns, we can often say, you know what? God, what hope is there for me to be in this situation? What this health crisis, maybe this financial crisis, maybe this job crisis, whatever it is that you're going through, God is in the detours, because it says that the Lord was with Joseph, and everything that he did, he caused it to succeed. God might remove us from our comfort zone so he can develop something of our character. He might take us out of the place of comfort that you and I experience so that he can bring us into a new level of deeper character. Because Pastor Wayne says it this way, your gifts will only take you as far as your character can sustain you. Your gifts will only take you as far as your character can sustain you. Meaning Joseph, he knew the destination. He knew that one day he was going to be ruling somewhere, but he didn't yet have the character fully developed in that day to sustain it then. And it says in Psalms, until the time came to fulfill his dreams, the Lord tested Joseph's character. It's interesting. The Lord tested Joseph's character. He knew what lay within Joseph's potential, but yet Joseph needed to develop the character to sustain his potential. And, you know, it says that Joseph was well-built and good-looking. And I think we have a historically accurate photo of what he looked like. Do we have that photo? Yeah, that's a really good-looking dude. This is what Joseph probably looked like. We can take that down. It's so much of a distraction, especially those online. Now, Potiphar had a wife. And it says she had the hots for Joseph because he was well-built and good-looking, kind of like someone else. And she would make advancements on him, and he would reject every single one of them. And it says this, no one is greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God? And though she spoke to Joseph day after day after day, he refused to go to bed with her or even to be with her. You see, Joseph shows us what true character looks like, because Potiphar tries to get Joseph to play hanky-panky with her, but he ain't playing, because he knows that it's a sin against God. He didn't say, how could I sin against my master? No, he said, how can I sin against my God and do this wicked thing? And so Joseph avoided her. It says that he wouldn't even be around with her. You know, as he's cleaning, as he's dusting the halls, he could have found the room that she was in because he liked the attention and be like, what's up, Potiphar? Just kind of dusting this mantle over here. You want me to clean these blinds? And he could have been flexing and showing off what God gave him, but he knew that we shouldn't play with sin. We shouldn't even shirk the line. We shouldn't dip the toe in and around sin, because if we dip our toe in, we might get ensnared. And Joseph did the best thing he could. He fled from sin. Joseph understood that it was God that was bringing him success. And how could he sin against God? But one day, Potiphar's wife traps him, and she grabs him by his cloak, and he rips it off and runs out of the house shirtless. And she holds on to it. And when his master came home, she told him that he tried to violate her and embarrass the whole family. And so obviously Potiphar is furious. And it says Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. But while Joseph was there in the prison, the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in the prison, and he was made responsible for all that was done there. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. You see, God is in the detours, because we can see Joseph going from being promised something to getting into the pit, to being sold to Potiphar, to being falsely accused, to being thrown into prison. But the promise wasn't void. The promise is still true because God was with him through it all. And God caused him to be successful in everything that he did. Now, where can I stay faithful when it feels like all life is hopeless in those times? When I feel like I am lost and without a map, when I feel like I'm up a creek, when I feel like there is no hope for the step ahead, how can I remain faithful to God? And that's really what Joseph shows us, that regardless of what it is, God will show you the right thing to do. Staying faithful where you are, especially when it doesn't make sense. You know, when he's in prison, he gets two new cellmates, the cupbearer of the king and the chief baker of the king. And the cupbearer and the chief baker, they had somehow offended Pharaoh, and so he threw him into prison. And one night, they both have a dream. And one dream was a good dream for one of them, and the other one was not a great dream. You can read the story later. But Joseph interprets both their dreams, and for the cupbearer, it's a favorable outcome. He says that the Pharaoh is going to release you in 3 days' time and restore you to your position and your status. And he says this, but when all goes well with you, remember me and show me kindness, mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of this prison. And it says, the chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. And I read that and I thought, man, there are times when I feel forgotten by God. There have been times where I'm crying out to God and I'm not receiving a response, and I feel a little forgotten. And this encourages me to know maybe people might forget us, but God never forgets us. You are always in God's mind. You are always on his heart. Every single one of us is valuable to God, and he knows what we need. And so while he was there in prison, he was forgotten. And then when 2 full years had passed, Pharaoh had a dream. Pharaoh had a dream. And if you're taking notes, this is our third point. God is in the destination. You see, God was already working behind the scenes in the palace. God is in the destination. He knew what the end result would need to be. And so God was working on Joseph's behalf. Pharaoh has 2 vivid dreams, but they are one and the same. Both dreams were all about 7 years of famine that were coming after 7 years of plenty. But yet, he couldn't interpret these dreams. He didn't understand them. And it says, in the morning, his mind was troubled, so he sent for all the magicians and wise men of Egypt. Pharaoh told them his dreams, but no one could interpret them for him. But then, read this next part with me. Then the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, today I am reminded of my shortcomings. You know, it's in this moment. It's kind of a perfect timing. The Bible calls it the fullness of time, where at the right moment, God intervenes. Because had he remembered Joseph too early, it wouldn't have mattered as much. It was the perfect timing where everything lined up for God to say, now's the moment. And Joseph had to be ready, because had Joseph failed along the way, had he given up, had he let go of the dream, man, this moment wouldn't be one we're reading about, but this is a beautiful point where Pharaoh calls Joseph. Joseph interprets the dream, but he doesn't just give him the information, he gives him the wisdom to act. He says, now let Pharaoh look for a discerning and wise man and put him in charge of the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh appoint commissioners over the land and take a fifth of the harvest of Egypt during the 7 years of abundance. And they should collect all the food of these good years that are coming and store up the grain under the authority of Pharaoh to be kept in the cities for food. This food should be held in reserve for the country to be used for the 7 years of famine that will come upon Egypt so that the country may not be ruined by the famine. And this makes me realize success is more than about reaching the destination. True success is about being faithful to God every step of the way. That's what true success is. When I look at Joseph's life, I see a life of success, not because he didn't go through hard things, not because he didn't go through hard times, not because he didn't face adversity. No, his life was successful because he remained faithful. And then the Pharaoh sees there is no one as wise as Joseph, and so he decides to put Joseph as second in command of all of Egypt. He exalts him from this position of being in prison into the palace, being one of royalty and in charge and ruling over the nation. You know, Joseph exhibits not only knowledge but wisdom, and you and I, we live in a day and age where knowledge is readily available at our fingertips. There's an abundance of knowledge, but wisdom is knowing what to do with that knowledge. Wisdom is being able to implement knowledge in a way that honors and pleases God. And Joseph, he was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from Pharaoh's presence and traveled throughout Egypt. You know, at this moment, Joseph is not only set free, but he's set above and he's set apart in a new way where he is recognized as being in authority. And I love that Joseph's life is one of great twists and turns, but it shows how we can have faith in the waiting. Because when Joseph received the dream, he was 17 years old. 17 years old. But when he entered service to the king, he was 30 years old. That's 13 years. And I was trying to think, when's the last time I waited 13 years for anything? And then I remembered, it was when I met my wife at the age of 13. I felt like God said, you're going to marry that girl. And I said, yes, I am. And you know what? 13 years later, we got married. And it has been a dream come true for her and me. But really, there is a process where we're waiting for something, and it might seem like a long journey of twists and turns and ups and downs, but it's a refining process where God is bringing about character development, understanding and wisdom and knowledge and insight. And he's working that into Joseph's life. Eventually, though, his family experiences the famine and they come to Egypt. And I don't know, God has a sense of humor, because this whole next part is all about Joseph messing with his brothers, because he dresses up and they can't tell who he is. They don't know it's Joseph, and he has fun with them. Like, he is messing with them. He even threatens to put them in prison because they're spies, and they're bowing down and begging him, and he's probably eating it up. But you know, at the end of it, their entire family is saved. They move to Egypt and they thrive in the land of Egypt, in the land of Goshen. And at the end of Jacob's life, the father, he says, hey, be good to your brothers. And the brothers think that Joseph is going to put them to death and retaliate for what they did to him. And they come to him and they beg him, hey, to treat them kindly. But he says this, you intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. You see, Joseph knew that his success didn't come from his own grit and tenacity. It came from God. His success wasn't something for his own providence. It wasn't something for his own prominence or position, but it was God's providence to work on behalf of his people to save them from a famine that would wipe out the world. And so God was at work behind the scenes, and it was something that was God's work on his behalf to save many people. Now, even as the prime minister, Joseph recognized that God's hand was the hand of success in his life. True success is found in fulfilling God's purposes in our lives. True success is found in accomplishing what God has asked us to do. And nothing more than that, because true success is one that lasts into eternity. Because there is something called providence in the Bible, where it's God is working with everything to sustain everything. And he can turn all things for good in your and my life. Whatever you and I go through, it says that God can use for good. We know that all things work out together for good for those that love God and are called according to his purpose. And so that's the divine providence of God, that he can take anything you and I go through, anything of hardship, anything of difficulty, anything of a trial, and work it for good. He sustains us. And this allows us to have faith in the gaps, knowing that while I'm looking at my life, I know where I want to go. I know where I am now, but there's something missing in the middle. And can I encourage you, that's God's place to fill. That's the place for faith to step in and for God to lead you through every single twist and turn, up and down, nook and cranny. God is going to guide you, because I'd rather have God guiding me than a map with no real helper or no real hope to navigate it on my own. If you feel like you're in the midst of a detour, can I encourage you, maybe it's God's invitation to develop something. Because detours can develop us into something greater of a potential for our future, because God has a preferred future for you. God has something in store for you that maybe you don't yet see it, but you know that there's a hope that lays ahead. And that hope is in Jesus. And we know all things work together for good for those that love God and are called according to his purpose. Can you say amen to that?